Hi, everybody. Are you just a negative person? That's just who you are as a person at the core. Like you always see the glass half empty. And man, those positive people, you'd like to pop them in the face because you're kind of done with the whole positivity all the time. If this is you, or if this is somebody in your life, you might want to keep listening. Welcome. This is how to fix your sucky life. That's right. Maybe you're somebody who says, so life sucks. Now what? Right? Fix me, doc. I don't know what to do with all of this. This is a podcast that teaches anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about how to get control of the anxiety in their life, the stress in their life, all of those feelings that are bogging you down. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Marr, a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a trauma therapist. And I'm here to help you understand how things early in our life, things like trauma or really difficult times, impact us later in life, so much so that it drives us off course and into patterns that are not helping us. They don't serve us and they create suffering for us. And there's a lot of information swimming out there. So I know that people are looking to feel better and want to know what works. Why don't we help you fix that sucky life? I take all of the information from neuroscience, my experience over the last 2 decades, and all the fits and starts of my own personal life, and I put it all together in a toolbox for you so that you can stop just surviving and learn how to really thrive in your life. I know it's possible to get there, so let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. All right. So we've had a couple of these podcasts. I've introduced you to these concepts of the nervous system. Guess what? Neurobiology will probably come up in literally every episode here because that is just my stick. That is where I like to go back to the science, the evidence. I love helping you to see how this madness inside us, this web of neurons and the interface with our outside world and inside world. I want you to know how all that works. I want to demystify that for you, because I think if I do, then you are in a better position to do life differently. Like you can really maybe change things for yourself. So are you negative? Like, is that a thing even? Like, can people really just be pessimists? Is it an actual scientific thing, doc? Well, kinda. So let's talk this through a little bit. I have had my fair share of people across the couch who come in a mindset that everything around them, everything is just shit. Like they just think that when things are going well, it's the exception to the rule, and they are just waiting for that next shoe to drop. That's their outlook. Depending on how rigid that is, I get more and more curious that they had, just like I mentioned in my last episode, some sort of traumatic event that led them to create that worldview for themselves. But I have had my fair share. In fact, I'll go session after session after session with folks. And what I'll hear is, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. What's the point? I try these things and it feels better for a second, and then, some shoe drops, right? Well, let me just like give you an example. So take, for instance, like the person who comes in and, it was a recent breakup that precipitated that they wanted counseling. And so they're sitting with me and they're telling me, what a piece of crap that person is and how you should have known earlier and why didn't I see it coming? And well, I guess it wouldn't have mattered because I probably would have done it anyway. And then, we'll start little by little to dig ourselves out of that hole and help this person stay focused on the things that are going well. So then they tell me like, well, work has been pretty good and I got a raise this past year, feeling good about that, feeling good about, getting some new accounts. That's been great. Oh, good. And then the next week they come in. Yeah, that sucks. Like my boss came in, he was really mad at me. All of that got torn down. All right. What else is going well in your life? And we'll kind of try to find something that has an alternative narrative to this other really wrong narrative that they are pulled and compelled into that's negative. Maybe it's like, I moved into a new place. I'm really happy about it. I finally own my own place, feeling pretty good about myself. But everything else is shit. Can't find a date. Work is rough, but okay. But like in the grand scheme of things, there's some good things, right? Yeah. Next time they come in. Yeah, that sucks. Yeah. I live in Minnesota. The furnace went out. So now I'm thousands of dollars in hock because I had to buy myself a new furnace in the middle of winter. And, so it's like there's like that repeated pattern, right? Repeated pattern of something happens and that's the highlight of the low light rather of their life at the moment. But there is just kind of this tendency towards the negative. When I'm teaching graduate students, which I also do, by the way, one of the ways that we talk about the caricature of this is to think about Eeyore, right? So Eeyore didn't have no friends. Eeyore, they all asked him to come in and he might have even had a little glimpse of enjoyment here and there, right? But Eeyore overall always saw the negative in all the things that were happening around him. And there are individuals that tend to fall into this. And so is there science that supports this? Here's what I'd like to talk about today. This idea of cognitive bias. So bias in general, let's just talk about bias, right? Like we've all heard that term. So what it really is getting at is that some way that we filter things turns all the things that we are perceiving and puts them through that filter, turns everything into that filter. And so then everything gets changed in a way towards that way of thinking. So that's really the premise of bias. And cognitive bias is a psychological concept where we might get one of those filters, one of those perspectives, and it really starts to interfere with our ability to see the reality of a situation, and it kind of tinges it towards one way. Now, there's another thing at play here. I do think that this example person I just gave you has cognitive bias towards the negative. And I am highly curious that part of that reason is it feels like it's warding off danger. It feels like it's a way to control their world, right? If I just assume that everything sucks, then I'm always preparing for the worst, and I only am pleasantly surprised if the good things happen. But if you live your life that way, you actually spend more time in the discomfort of the worst instead of in the balance that everything is happening all at the same time. And I think on the other side of this is, and I think that when you're reinforced enough for thinking that controls your world, that's the draw. So people might even kind of have awareness that they're negatively tinged and that it's not helpful to them, but they can't seem to shift it because they also have buy-in that somewhere in them tells them this is safe. This is what keeps me protected from the worst thing happening. It's so ironic that it actually just keeps them in the worst thing happening, because if you're thinking about it, it's happening, even if it's not happening out here, right? Here's the weird thing about the brain. If the brain is watching something, even if it's not happening to them, you're watching a movie and you see the horror flick, what happens? Jump scares, right? Like it pulls you in. Your nervous system is living through that experience, whether it's actually happening to you or not. And even the case scenarios in our head, even the worrying in our head or ruminating, which is like turning a thought around over and over and over again, all of that is being experienced by your physical body, right? That's a lot of negativity. And if you start to do that, part of what cognitive bias does is it reinforces itself. So now, man, if I spend, I'm up for 18 hours a day and I spent 16 of those hours thinking in a negative way, then my cognitive bias tells me, holy crud, like 90% of the time you're thinking that things are negative. And it's a, self-fulfilling prophecy. Let me give you an example of this. If you're not driving, why don't you take a look around your room? And as you're looking around the room, I just want you to notice and kind of make a mental note of 5 different things that are the color blue. My office has a ton of them. So all you have to do is look over my shoulder. But you're just looking around and finding 5 things that are blue. Got those? Okay. Now close your eyes. And I want you to tell me 5 things you saw in the room that were yellow. Yeah, here's the thing. When we are training our brain to do a thing, it will do a thing. And cognitive bias is working like this. If I tell myself, shoe's going to drop, something bad's going to happen, that's what I'm looking for in my world. And that's what I pick up on. And so if your therapist says what's going well, you wouldn't have seen it. And here's the other thing at play, that nervous system stuff I talked about last week, those 3 layers. You're safe, you're okay, you're in fight or flight, or you're in freeze or fall or fawn. Well, when we dice those apart, what we know to be true is in both of those lower categories, we're believing that something in our environment is threatening. We're in survival mode. That's really what's happening now. That alarm is going off that something bad is happening. And part of why negative thinking gets so addictive for folks, and that's really what I would call it, is because our nervous system is interpreting that we're protecting ourselves, that we're on high alert and need to be on high alert. And shutting that off is necessary for us to see the broader perspective or think in a different way. Man, if our body thinks there's a bear, we can't just calm down. Right? I just had this happen to me not very long ago where I was in the middle of my day and I looked down at a text and it was from somebody in the first, you know how you see like the first few lines. What it said set my alarm system off, like set it off. Like I thought, oh my God, I forgot to blah, 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 blah. And I was like ready for panic. Once I had opened it up and was able to respond to it, I knew that I was safe, but man, was my alarm system already a ringing in my body. And so there really is like a need to regulate your system. I had to take my body for a walk. That's what I call it. Like I went outside in cold weather in Minnesota, walked for 20 minutes, and that was what finally calmed that down. Neurochemically, what I'm doing there is I'm using the endorphins in my body to kind of be the anti-anxiety medication and anti-pain medication that it is naturally, and take me down from that high cortisol and adrenaline rush that happened when I had looked at the text. So I think that's also a feature in what's happening in this negative thinking pattern. So it isn't just as easy as think positively, flip that around. In fact, what I'd tell you is the science really supports that if we feel a way first, if we believe that it's going to feel better, or if we believe it's going to feel worse, that changes our thinking way faster than our thinking changes how we feel about something. If I tell myself, don't be scared, and my heart is racing, good luck. That's not going to actually cancel that out. So I think that there is some science that gets people in to that negative bias that they have. And of course, if that gets really bad, it even is diagnosable. Like those are things that contribute to things like anxiety disorders and depressive disorders, because, you know, once we get into the habit of it, we really get addicted or trapped in the reinforcement of, I have to stay here, I'm in survival mode, I have to stay here, I'm in survival mode. And turning the mind away from that is a hard thing to do. But I won't leave you with this in this podcast with just doom and gloom. What I'll suggest, and it's probably been suggested in myriad of ways to you before, is starting the practice of mindfulness or meditation. And the reason for this is it actually builds muscle in your brain, builds neural pathways in your brain for focusing your mind elsewhere, even when you're activated in that limbic system, which is really what's happening. The top part, it's a top-down process, obviously. The autonomic nervous system kind of moves all about your vagal nerve, which goes into your gut. It goes into all of our organs, you know, to get us running and fighting and doing all the things. But where it begins is in the limbic system, you know, in organs like the amygdala, that are one of the larger areas in that limbic system that kind of can pull our attention away from reasonable thinking and get into that negative funk or survival mode. What I'd say is that in order to override that with the executive functioning, you have to have a pretty powerful bridge between the two. And people who have been honing in the negative pessimistic thinking Well, their bridges are like not there. It would be like a tree limb across a raging river. So we really need to help them build that up so that they could get access to the parts of their brain that can override this system and say, calm down, take your body for a walk, do some deep breathing, hum. Those are some of the things that get our autonomic nervous system to go into a more safe, what we call parasympathetic response. And I will just put in the plug that mindfulness and meditation builds that bridge. It builds it nice and strong. But just like exercise, it isn't something that's a one and done. You can't go to the gym, lift weights a couple times, and have a bodybuilder body. You need to go several times a week, every week, for the rest of your life to have that kind of a look, right? And similarly, to have this bridge between your limbic system and the frontal lobe, which that's where you're trying to access, you're going to have to do meditation or mindfulness regularly. Now, here's some good news. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 20 minutes is optimal. Honestly, it will give you some return. So start where you're at and move forward. I definitely suggest that you get over this idea that you're going to sit down and be a Buddhist monk, because you won't. And to get, over this idea that mindfulness means, or meditation means, that I stay focused on one thing in this moment and my mind never drifts, because that's not real. Your mind will drift several times. And in fact, what builds that muscle, what is the rep, like, if you were at the gym, what does the rep is if you turn your mind from where it wandered to back to whatever your practice of meditation or mindfulness is. So as many reps as you need to, right? Your mind could wander a dozen times. It could wander 100 times. You're just going to have more reps if it did it 100 times. I would suggest kind of building one of those practices in, because it really does game change our ability to override, to be able to come up with an idea for, I got to take my body for a walk and get my autonomic nervous system more regulated if I want to, go about my day without panic. And for people who have negative thinking, sometimes that bottom up process of starting with things like mindfulness and meditation and exercise and deep breathing are the things that I suggest even across the couch, because I know that they have to be in place as resources, as tools available in your toolbox if you're going to be able to turn this around. Hope it was helpful. Hope that you're not feeling so bad about your negative thinking or about those people who are negative thinkers in your life, now that you have a little more understanding on the neurobiology of why that's happening. And I hope that you start your own mindfulness practice, because it really, really helps. Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I need to be sure that you understand this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and it is not a replacement for any mental health or medical therapy, counseling, or other treatments. I also want to be sure that if you are in crisis, that you seek out help. So I'm going to share with you here 2 different resources that you might use for yourself or someone else you know that's close to you in crisis. The first is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can find them at suicidepreventionlifeline.org online, or pick up the phone and dial 988. And you can talk to somebody right away if you're in crisis. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like to pick up the phone to talk to somebody directly, there is also a crisis text line. You can find them at crisistextline.org online, or you can text HOME to 741-741, and you'll reach somebody right away to help you in crisis. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I strongly encourage that you like and follow us wherever you find your podcasts. Share us if you like an episode and think somebody could use that information, and certainly leave a review if you feel like there's something that really resonated for you. It helps me when I see those reviews to make sure to have relevant material on the podcast that you want to hear about.